The stars hung in silence across the black sea of space, and yet for one small world, the silence was more terrifying than the roar of battle. The Varun people had once believed the galaxy was a place of unity, a council of many species, each sworn to defend one another against tyranny. But that was before the warships came, before their cities burned, before every call for help was met with nothing but the cold void. The first message had gone out in hope, their leader speaking with steady voice. As fire consumed the horizon, he begged the council. He begged the allied worlds. He begged anyone who could hear him to send ships, to send soldiers, to send something. But when the signal returned hours later, it was only the automated acknowledgement, the kind every desperate world received before being filed into silence. And so another message was sent, and another, and then another. Each one more frantic, each one showing broken streets, ruined homes, and children screaming as the sky was torn apart. But the replies never came. No ships, no promises, no friends, only empty channels and static. The Varun fleet had been strong once it had held the border against pirates and raiders, but the enemy that came was no raiding party. It was the Dominion, a vast empire built on fear. Their ships were enormous, their soldiers merciless, and their warlords delighted in crushing entire civilizations under their banners. When the Dominion's armada entered Varun space, the defenders fought bravely. They gave every ship, every weapon, every life they could, but they were outnumbered 10-1. The battles lasted days, then hours, then minutes, until the last fleet was broken and shattered across orbit. The survivors fell back to their homeworld thinking perhaps reinforcements would arrive, thinking perhaps allies would stand by them. The galaxy's treaties promised aid, but the galaxy remained still and silent, the ground people huddled in darkened shelters. Every boom of orbital fire shook the soil above them. The sky was lit with burning streaks of debris, falling down like stars turned to ash. Mothers held their children. Fathers picked up rifles far too old to make a difference, but they fought anyway because surrender meant slavery. And they all knew what the Dominion did to those who surrendered. The Varun High Council gathered inside the last citadel, their faces pale with exhaustion, their voices hollow. They had voted again and again to keep the distress calls active even when the messages went unanswered. Some argued it was hopeless. Others said perhaps just one world, perhaps one captain, perhaps one ship might yet hear them. The distress signal repeated endlessly, drifting into the black, each pulse a cry of despair, each echo weaker than the last. Above their world, the Dominion ships hung like dark moons. Their commander broadcast a single message down to the planet: surrender or burn. The Varun knew what surrender meant. There would be no mercy, there never was, and still the galaxy remained silent. The days stretched on into weeks, entire cities fell, entire continents burned, and still the signals were sent. The Varun people began to whisper in anger and fear. Why would the Council abandon them? Why would their allies turn their backs? Why would the galaxy condemn them to die alone? Some believed the Dominion had bribed the Council, others believed the galaxy was too afraid, and others whispered the most terrible thought of all, that perhaps they had simply been judged unworthy of saving, and so the silence grew heavier than the fire itself. One night, as the great city of Kalros fell beneath the weight of Dominion troops, a young officer named Serin sat beside a broken transmitter, her hands trembling. As she adjusted the settings, her commander had told her to abandon the station, that no one was listening, but she refused. She pressed the button and her voice cracked into the darkness again. "This is Serin of Varun. If anyone hears this, please. We are dying. The galaxy has left us. We are alone. We have nowhere left to run. If you can hear us, if you can send help, if you can send even one ship, please, please answer." Her message carried out past the broken orbit, past the silent allies, past the traitorous council into the deeper black, where few dared to travel. She closed her eyes, thinking it too would vanish, like all the others, swallowed by nothing. Hours later, far beyond her world, on the edge of charted space, a listening station orbiting Earth picked up a faint signal, distorted and fading. The technicians almost discarded it as background noise, but one paused and listened. The words came broken but clear enough. "Varun, dying galaxy, silent, please help." The technician stared for a long moment before rushing to her commander. Humanity had heard many signals. Before cries from the council calls to join wars, they had no part in demands for tribute, but this was different. This was not an empire. This was not a council. This was a people begging to live. Within hours, the signal reached Earth Command. The leaders of humanity gathered in silence around the playback, watching the Varun's shattered cities, hearing the desperate plea of Serin, and seeing the hopelessness. In her eyes, some argued humanity should stay out of it. The Dominion was vast. The galaxy would not intervene. Why should Earth risk itself for strangers? But others spoke with fire in their voices. Humanity knew what it was to be alone. They knew what it was to be abandoned by stronger powers, and they knew that silence was the most cruel death of all. And so a decision was made. Across Earth's fleets, across its colonies, across its stations, orders were given, ships were fueled, soldiers prepared. Engines roared to life. The stars that had seemed so distant now called humanity to war back. On Varun, Serin sat in the dark, listening to the endless static, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. She had almost given up when suddenly the signal crackled. Alive, her console lit up with strange codes, unfamiliar but strong, and then a voice, clear, steady and human, spoke into the darkness. "Varun, we hear you. You are not alone." Her heart stopped. Her breath caught. She replayed the words again to be. Certain tears filled her eyes as the signal repeated, this time stronger, this time unshaken. Humanity had heard them. Humanity was coming. And for the first time in many weeks, beneath the ashes of war, the Varun dared to hope. The Dominion did not know. Yet the Council still kept its silence. The galaxy still watched and judged from afar. But in that moment, none of it mattered. For in the endless void where no one else had answered, humanity had spoken 4 simple words that carried more weight than fleets and empires. "You are not alone." The message spread through the shelters, through the streets, through the broken armies of the Varun people, whispered it to each other as if it were a miracle. Humanity is coming. Humanity heard us. Humanity will stand with us in the Dominion's dark halls. Their commanders laughed at the idea, a young species untested in galactic war sending ships into the fire. They called it foolish. They called it suicide. They called it nothing at all. But deep down, in the void, where humanity's ships now moved, there was a fire growing, a defiance the galaxy had long forgotten. The silence of the galaxy had been broken, and from that silence came the echo of humanity's promise. A promise that would change everything forever. The night sky above Varun was filled with smoke and fire. Whole continents glowed red where the Dominion's bombardment had burned the land into ash. The people huddled in silence, waiting for the end. But then, for the first time in weeks, the silence broke, a signal from the stars. A voice not of despair, but of strength. The words spread like wildfire across the broken world. Humanity had heard them, and humanity was coming. No one believed it at first. Some said it was a trick. Some said it was only false hope to make the people surrender more easily. But then the sensors lit up across the last surviving command posts. Strange ships emerging from hyperspace. Not Dominion, not Council, but something new. Something unexpected. Varun commanders rushed to the bunkers to confirm the sight, and what they saw made their hearts stumble. Ships of steel, sharp and angled, with weapons glowing along their hulls, engines roaring like thunder. These were not the elegant cruisers of the Council, not the monstrous dreadnoughts of the Dominion. These ships looked raw and fierce, made for war, and yet controlled with discipline. The Dominion scouts detected them. First, Laughter filled their command rooms. They sneered at the small. A fleet that had arrived, they called them primitive, they called them foolish, they called them dead. Already, the Dominion commander ordered his ships to form up, prepare for destruction after all. No one defied the Dominion and lived down on the planet. Varun eyes stared at the sky, wondering if the newcomers were real, wondering if this was just another cruel trick. But then the comms burst alive with a steady voice, calm but firm. "This is Admiral Hayes of the United Terran Fleet to the people. Of Varun, you are not alone. We stand with you. Hold fast. Help has arrived." The word sent a shock through the Varun leaders. No one had ever spoken such words since the war began. No one had dared to stand against the Dominion, but now this young species, humanity, had chosen to stand with them. The first clash came quickly. The Dominion commander, eager to crush this defiance, sent a squadron of warships to sweep the humans aside. The Varun watched in silence, certain they would see the newcomers obliterated. But what happened next froze their breath. The human ships moved with precision. They darted between the larger Dominion cruisers, striking hard at weak points. Their railguns fired bursts of metal slugs that tore through enemy armor. Their missiles streaked like falling stars, detonating in blinding bursts. Dominion shields cracked, Dominion hulls burned, and within minutes the first squadron was in ruins. Cheers erupted across Varun shelters. The people who had only known fear for so long suddenly felt hope. Again, the humans were real, and they were fighting for them. But the battle was far from over. The Dominion pulled back in fury, regrouping their larger fleets. Their commander snarled at his officers, ordering a full-scale engagement. The humans had bloodied them once, but now they would drown them in fire. Admiral Hayes watched from the bridge of his flagship, the UNS Valiant, his crew calm. But tense screens lit up with enemy contacts, far more than their small task force could handle. Still, Hayes did not flinch. He turned to his officers and gave the order, "Humanity has made its choice. We hold the line for Varun." The Dominion fleet surged forward, vast and overwhelming, their weapons tearing through space. The humans answered with everything they had. Railguns thundered, missile bays emptied point defenses, spat fire to block incoming barrages. The void lit up in a storm of destruction. The Varun leaders could not look away. They had never seen war fought like this. The humans fought not as conquerors, not as desperate defenders, but as warriors who refused to surrender, even when hopelessly outnumbered. Every time a human ship fell, it did not die quietly. It rammed into enemy hulls or unleashed its last salvo before vanishing in fire. Every loss was turned into defiance, and the Dominion began to feel it. The realization that these strange humans would not break. Serin, the young officer who had first sent the desperate message, stood in the command bunker, staring at the display. Tears in her eyes. She had expected silence. She had expected death. But instead, she saw strangers bleed for her people without hesitation. "Why, Serin?" whispered to herself. "Why would they come? Why would they risk everything for us?" The answer came moments later over the comms. Admiral Hayes opened a channel to the Varun command, his face calm even as battle raged behind him. "We fight because no one deserves to die forgotten. We fight because silence is not the way of humanity. Your people will not fall alone, not while we still stand." The words cut through the despair like a blade. The Council had turned away, the Allies had abandoned them. But humanity had chosen differently. Humanity had chosen to fight above the planet. The battle raged on. The Dominion poured wave after wave into the human fleet. But every wave met resistance. The humans fought in tight formations, covering each other, striking with brutal efficiency. Though smaller and weaker, their tactics turned every clash into a bloody trade. The Dominion grew angrier, more desperate. Finally, the Dominion commander decided to make an example. He ordered a dreadnought into orbit, its massive cannons charging to burn the Varun capital into ash. The Varun civilians screamed as the giant ship loomed above them, its weapon growing brighter. But before it could fire a single blast, the human flagship, Valiant, broke formation and surged forward, engines blazing straight into the path of the dreadnought. The Dominion mocked them, calling it suicide, but the Valiant did not slow its weapons, pounded the dreadnought shields, collapsing under the focused fury. Railguns tore through. Its armor missiles ripped open its flanks. The dreadnought returned fire, pounding the Valiant's hull, tearing it apart, but still the human ship pressed forward like a predator, refusing to let go. Then, with one last surge, the Valiant fired everything. All at once, every missile, every gun, every reactor channeled into a single storm. The dreadnought shuddered and then erupted in a fireball brighter than a sun. The shockwave rippled across orbit, scattering Dominion formations. The Varun screamed, in awe and terror at the same time. The humans had sacrificed their flagship, but they had destroyed the enemy's most powerful weapon. The Dominion line wavered for the first time in history. Their fleets had been pushed back by a species barely known to the stars. Admiral Hayes's final words from the Valiant echoed across all channels before the ship was consumed. "Hold the line, humanity stands with." Varun, the Dominion furious, pulled their remaining forces back, regrouping, unwilling to admit defeat, but shaken by the ferocity of the humans. They would return with more. They would return with everything they had. But the Varun knew now they were not alone. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. Humanity would fight even against impossible odds. In the shelters, children who had cried in silence now shouted with joy. People embraced one another, whispering the name of their saviors, the humans, the ones who chose to stand when the galaxy stayed silent. Hope flickered to life. In their broken hearts, Seren stood at the transmitter, staring at the stars. She whispered into the dark, "Thank you, humanity." The war was far from over. The Dominion would come again, stronger than before. The Council would still stay silent. The galaxy would still watch and judge. But the silence had been broken forever. Humanity had spoken in fire and blood. They had declared to the Dominion, to the Council, to the entire galaxy, that no one was too small to fight for. And for the Varun, it meant everything. They were no longer waiting to die. They were waiting for tomorrow, waiting to rise, waiting to stand with those who had stood with them. The Dominion had thought the humans were nothing. The Council had thought the Varun were lost, but now a new truth began to spread across the stars, whispered from one world to another. Humanity had arrived, and humanity would not be silent. The fires of battle still burned in the skies above Varun. The wreckage of ships drifted like broken bones. Across the void, trails of smoke and fire painting the heavens where once only stars had lived. The people of Varun huddled in their shelters, listening to the distant thunder of orbital war, their hearts torn between fear and hope. Humanity had come, humanity had fought, and humanity had not run even when the Dominion's fleet bore down on them with overwhelming force. But the Dominion was not finished. The enemy commander, furious at the loss of his dreadnought, swore vengeance. He would not allow these humans to become a symbol of resistance. He would crush them so thoroughly that no other world would ever dare follow their example. Already reinforcements were on the way, entire fleets gathering at the edges of the system, preparing to strike and wipe both Varun and humanity from existence. On the surface, Seren watched the skies from the bunker, her eyes red from exhaustion, her body heavy with fear, but also with something else she had not felt in weeks. Hope. The humans had bled for them, and in that sacrifice she had seen something she had never known before, defiance against impossible odds. The Varun had believed themselves forgotten, abandoned, left to die. But these strangers had shattered that belief with fire. And still above in orbit, Admiral Kepler, now in command, after the fall of the Valiant, stood on the bridge of the cruiser. Resolute, his face grim, but his voice steady, reports came from every ship. Losses had been heavy, more than half their task force destroyed. And yet the enemy had suffered as well. The Dominion had tasted human fury and been forced to retreat for the moment. But everyone aboard knew this was not victory. It was only the first clash. The Dominion would return stronger, far stronger. And when they did, humanity would be tested like never before. Scouts soon confirmed the truth. The enemy was massing entire fleets across the system. Serin overheard the transmission in the bunker, her heart freezing as the report came. The Dominion was preparing to unleash everything they had. The commanders of Varun whispered in despair if the humans fell. Then so too would their world, yet Admiral Kepler did not falter. He looked across the bridge at his crew, ordinary men and women carrying the weight of an entire world's survival on their shoulders, and he spoke with iron in his voice. We cannot stop them all, but we can hold them long enough to give Varun a chance. And if we hold long enough, maybe, just maybe, the galaxy will finally see what is happening here. The preparations began. Humanity's smaller fleet moved into tight formations. Every weapon armed, every missile loaded, every railgun charged. Engineers worked without rest, patching holes, sealing breaches, rearming defenses. Soldiers strapped into combat armor boarding pods, ready in case the fight spilled into ground. Every man and woman understood the stakes they were facing. An empire that had ruled the stars through terror and silence for centuries, the Dominion. Fleet arrived with fire and thunder. Their ships filled the sky like a swarm of locusts, their weapons glowing with deadly power. The commander of the Dominion broadcast across all channels, his voice cold and mocking to the humans. He said, "You are children playing with fire. Step aside, and perhaps we will let you crawl back to your small world. Resist and you will die, as all who defy us." Admiral Kepler stood tall on the bridge as the words echoed. He allowed silence to hang for a moment, then responded with steady voice, "Humanity does not abandon its friends. We do not surrender. We do not kneel. You will find us ready." The first clash came, a storm of missiles streaking from Dominion cruisers, a wall of fire filling the void. The human point defense lit up, streaks of light shooting down incoming warheads, explosions bursting across the black. Even so, several missiles broke through, smashing into human hulls, shattering metal, and fire crews scrambled. But still, the fleet held. Then the humans answered. Railguns thundered, hurling slugs at impossible speeds, tearing through enemy shields. Missiles surged outward, guided by precision systems, striking weak points across the Dominion formation. Explosions erupted, enemy ships broke apart, fire and debris filling the heavens. The Varun watched from below, their eyes wide with awe. No ally had ever fought for them like this. No ally had ever taken the enemy head-on with such fury. But the Dominion was endless. Wave after wave surged forward, ships towering over the human fleet. The odds overwhelming, the Dominion commander laughed, as human vessels buckled and died. Yet even as they fell, they took enemy ships with them. Every loss turned into defiance, ramming, burning, exploding, never going quietly into the dark. On the surface, Serin listened to every report, her heart pounding with every loss, every victory. She knew the humans could not last forever. But she also knew something else. They were not running. Not one of them, not a single ship turned away from the storm. The Varun soldiers around her clenched their fists, shame filling them. They had been ready to surrender, ready to die forgotten. Yet these strangers fought for them, harder than they had fought for themselves. Hours passed, the battle raging across orbit. Turning the night sky into fire, the Dominion pressed harder, bringing in their capital ships, massive weapons, tearing apart entire human cruisers with a single shot. Still, Kepler refused to give ground. Every maneuver calculated, every counterstrike executed with brutal precision. He knew they could not win in numbers, but they could show the enemy something it had never faced before: The humans fought with a ferocity the Dominion had not expected, not as slaves, not as pawns, but as free warriors. Willing to give everything for others who had nothing to give in return, the Varoon watched in stunned silence as humanity's courage unfolded before them, and slowly something began to awaken within them, something long buried beneath fear and despair. Finally, as the battle reached its peak, the Dominion unleashed its full might, dozens of ships converging on the human line, attempting to break it in one final crushing strike. Admiral Kepler knew this was the moment the line would either hold or shatter. He ordered all ships to tighten formation to focus fire. Every crew member, every soldier knew what was coming, and they faced it without fear. The clash was apocalyptic. The sky itself seemed to burn as ships collided, weapons blazing, explosions rippling across orbit. The Dominion expected the humans to break, but instead they fought with even greater fury. The line did not collapse. It burned like fire, refusing to be extinguished. And then something happened that neither side expected. The Varoon fighters, old and broken though they were, suddenly rose from the planet's surface, their pilots screaming with defiance as they joined the human line. The sight shocked both the humans and the Dominion. The Varoon had been broken, defeated, enslaved by fear, yet now inspired by the humans. They found strength again. Together, human and Varoon ships struck back railguns and lasers and missiles in one unified storm. The Dominion line faltered for the first time, entire cruisers tearing apart. Dreadnoughts crippled by focused fire, Admiral Kepler seized the moment, ordering the counterattack. The humans and Varoon together pushed forward, throwing everything into the fight. The Dominion commander roared in fury, his arrogance shattered by the sight of two broken peoples standing against his empire. He ordered retreat for the first time in decades. The Dominion pulled back, abandoning the battlefield, leaving wreckage and silence in their wake. On the ground, the Varoon erupted in cheers, hope filling their voices for the first time in memory. They had seen the impossible, the Dominion beaten back, not by the mighty council, not by ancient allies, but by humanity and their own desperate courage. Serin wept openly at the transmitter, whispering, "Over and over humanity stood with us. They stood with us." In the command bunker, the Varoon High Council looked at one another, the shame heavy on their shoulders. But so too was a new resolve. Humanity had shown them what it meant to fight. Not for power, not for conquest, but for each other. The galaxy had abandoned them, but humanity had not, and now they too would not abandon themselves above. In orbit, the human fleet drifted, battered and broken but unbroken. Admiral Kepler stood silent on the bridge, staring into the void. He knew the war was far from over. The Dominion would return with greater force. The Council would still look away. But he also knew something had changed tonight. The Varoon were no longer waiting to die. Humanity was no longer unknown. The galaxy had seen their defiance, and deep within the darkness of space, whispers began to spread from one listening post to another. Humanity fights. Humanity does not abandon, humanity stands. The Dominion had tasted their defiance, and it would never forget it. The wreckage of battle still drifted above Varoon, broken ships glowing faintly as they spun through the endless dark pieces of steel, and shattered hulls falling slowly into the planet's atmosphere, streaking like fire across the sky. The people below pointed to the trails, whispering in awe, some believing them to be signs of hope, others fearing they were omens of the greater storm yet to come. For the Dominion was not defeated. Not truly. The retreat of their fleet had not been surrender. It had been fury held back, a predator waiting for the perfect strike in the grand halls of the Dominion warlord. Kazak stood before his gathered commanders, his voice a low growl that echoed with venom. "These humans have dared to defy us. These weaklings have dared to bleed us, for that they will pay, not with victory, not with mercy, but with fire, until their very name is Ashkazak was no ordinary warlord. He was infamous across 100 systems known for his cruelty. His victories carved into the bones of the civilizations he had destroyed. He had broken empires. He had enslaved entire species to him. The humans were nothing but a young race, playing at war, daring to raise their voices against the oldest empire in the galaxy. He would make an example of them, one so brutal that the memory of it would freeze the blood of every world that ever considered rebellion. His orders spread quickly, fleets mobilized across the Dominion, their engines roaring. As they gathered strength, unlike the first attack, this would not be a skirmish, this would not be intimidation, this would be annihilation. Back on Varun, Admiral Kepler stood on the bridge of the Resolute, his body heavy with fatigue, but his eyes. Sharp reports flowed across the screens. His fleet was battered hulls, breached systems damaged, too many lives lost already. The Varun ships that had risen in defiance were even worse. Their technology outdated, their fuel reserves dwindling, their weapons barely functional, and yet in that weakness lay something powerful, something the Dominion had not expected. Will Kepler listened in silence as his officers spoke of supply shortages, of damaged reactors, of the Dominion massing at the edge of the system. Every fact spoke the same truth. When the Dominion returned, the humans and Varun together would not be enough to stop them, not in numbers, not in strength. Serin sat in the underground command bunker, her hands clasped tightly together. She had heard the whispers the Dominion was preparing to strike again. The people around her were afraid, not just of the Dominion, but of the silence of the galaxy. The Council had still not spoken. The Allies had still not moved. No one came. No one. Answered only humanity, and even they were stretched thin. One night, as the fires of ruined cities glowed faintly against the horizon, Serin overheard her commander whispering to another, "Perhaps the humans will leave. Perhaps they will decide Varun is not worth their blood." The words made her chest ache because she knew they were true. The humans had already given so much more than any other race. Why would they give more? Why would they die for strangers? But when she returned to the transmitter and tuned into the human channel, she heard a voice that crushed those doubts. Admiral Kepler addressing his fleet. His words steady. "We do not turn away from those who stand beside us. We do not abandon those who ask for our hand. We are humanity, and we will hold the line." The Varun, who overheard those words, whispered them like a prayer, passing them from one shelter to another. The humans will not leave, the humans will fight. But in the darkness of space, Karzak's fleets continued to gather. Every day, scouts reported more ships at the edge of the system. Dreadnoughts larger than cities, carriers loaded with swarms of fighters, cruisers armed with weapons that could burn continents. The numbers were beyond counting. The Dominion was not simply coming to crush humanity and Varun, they were coming to erase them. Kepler knew time was running out. He ordered what remained of his fleet into defensive positions, their ships forming rings around Varun, their weapons aimed at the void, waiting for the storm. He ordered engineers to strip wrecks for parts, ordered Varun workers to retrofit their old fighters with human technology every hour. Every minute counted. On the surface, Serin and others began organizing civilians not for escape, but for resistance. If the Dominion broke through, then the fight would come to the streets, and they would not be taken alive. They dug trenches, they built barricades, they trained with rifles passed down through generations, rusty old weapons given new purpose. Their voices no longer whispered in fear, they shouted in defiance. Then came the first shadow. Dominion scouts slipped past the edges of the system, striking at human patrols. Small skirmishes that tested the line. Ships were lost soldiers. Burned, but humanity did not waver. Every Dominion scout destroyed carried a message back to Karzak. The humans were waiting, and Kazak smiled a predator's smile. He wanted them to wait. He wanted them to believe they had a chance. Only then would his vengeance taste sweeter. At last the day came when the Dominion Armada emerged from hyperspace. The stars themselves seemed to vanish behind the vast black shapes of their warships. The sky lit up with the glow of thousands of engines. The Varun trembled as alarms rang across their bunkers. Every child, every soldier, every leader staring upward in terror, the Dominion broadcast. And filled the channels, Kazak himself appearing, his massive form, armored in steel, his voice dripping with cruelty. Humans, you have chosen death. You have chosen to bleed for insects who were already broken. Now you will see the cost of defiance. We will scour your fleets from the stars. We will grind your bones into dust. We will turn this world into a memory. The Varun leaders bowed their heads, despair filling them. But Admiral Kepler answered with steady voice, "You may have the numbers, you may have the weapons, but you will never have our will, and when this battle is done, the galaxy will remember not your cruelty, but our defiance." The Dominion laughed, the signal cut, and then the first wave surged forward, thousands of fighters swarming. Like locusts, dreadnoughts unleashing beams that lit the void with fire. The human fleet fired back railguns, thundering missiles streaking across space, explosions tearing through the black. The battle was like nothing the Varun had ever imagined. The heavens themselves burning with fury, ship after ship fell, debris raining down onto the planet below. Each explosion felt like the end. Yet still the humans held still. They fought every maneuver, exact every sacrifice, deliberate entire crews giving their lives to block Dominion salvos. The Varun fighters flew beside them, outmatched but unwilling to yield pilots, screaming into the comms as they rammed into enemy hulls, turning their own deaths into fire. Serin sat at her station in the bunker, her hands shaking as she tracked the battle, each loss like a blade in her chest, each victory a spark in the dark. She heard the cries of pilots dying. She heard the voices of humans speaking calmly as their ships burned. She realized then that humanity was not fighting only for Varun. They were fighting because they refused to be silent. They refused to accept the cruelty of the galaxy. They fought because someone had to. Above the planet, Admiral Kepler watched as the Dominion pressed harder, wave after wave slamming into their line. His fleet was dying, and yet he did not order retreat. He looked at his officers, bloodied but resolute, and spoke quietly. "We will hold here no matter the cost. If we fall today, we will fall as humans. We will fall." Standing, the Dominion commander sneered, thinking victory certain. But then something unexpected happened as the human fleet bled, as the Varun fought with everything left in them. The broadcast of the battle began to spread. The Dominion had mocked them by sending the fight across open channels, but now across the galaxy, other worlds were watching. Other peoples who had once been silent saw humanity's defiance, saw Varun's courage, and whispers began to spread. If humans can fight, why can't we? If Varun can rise, why can't we? Kazak had wanted to crush hope, but instead hope began to ignite across the stars. The battle raged endlessly, fire painting the void, screams echoing across channels, humanity breaking, yet never breaking. Humanity standing as the Dominion threw everything at them. Still the line held still, the guns roared, still the will remained unbroken. And as Serin looked to the burning heavens, she whispered through tears, "Humanity stands with us, and so we will stand with them." The warlord Kazak had promised annihilation, but he had awakened something he could not yet understand, for in trying to crush the humans, he had given them the greatest weapon of all, the gaze of the galaxy, watching as silence was broken forever. Battle in the skies above Varun had ended with fire and silence. The Dominion fleets had withdrawn their ships, leaving behind wreckage and death, but the retreat was not defeat. It was anger held back a storm, preparing to strike again. Admiral Kepler knew it. The Varun Council knew it. Even the people hiding in the bunkers knew it. The Dominion was not done. They would come again with more ships, more fury, and this time they would not stop until Varun was nothing but ash. But as the fleets licked their wounds, as the survivors counted the dead, something darker began to stir, not in the stars, but among the Varun themselves. Whispers of betrayal spread through the bunkers and command halls. Not all Varun leaders had accepted the humans, not all believed in standing with them. Some feared that humanity's defiance would only bring greater destruction to their world, and in their fear they looked to the enemy for mercy. Serin was the first to sense it. She worked tirelessly at the transmitter, listening to every channel filtering through endless static and coded signals. One night, she caught something faint, a strange pattern that did not match Dominion transmissions. It was closer. It came from the surface itself. Varun signals hidden. Within the chaos of the war, she replayed them again and again, her heart sinking as she realized the truth. Someone among her people was speaking to the Dominion. She brought it to her commander, but he shook his head, refusing to believe it. No one would dare, no one would turn to the very monsters who had burned their cities. But Serin had seen too much fear, too much despair. She knew desperation could break even the strongest souls. Above in orbit, Admiral Kepler and his officers also began to suspect sabotage systems that had been repaired, suddenly failed supply runs, disrupted Varun ships assigned to patrols, vanishing into silence. It was subtle at first, but patterns formed. The Dominion knew too much, knew where the humans would strike, knew when their defenses were weak. Someone was feeding them information. Kepler called a council with the Varun leaders, his voice cold and sharp. You have someone among you sending messages to the enemy. If this continues, neither of us will survive. The Varun Council erupted in argument. Some swore loyalty, some accused others of cowardice, voices clashing until the chamber echoed with chaos. Finally, one of the elder councillors spoke, his voice quiet but firm. If betrayal is here, we must find it before it destroys us all. Serin worked tirelessly, tracing the hidden signals, her eyes bloodshot, her hands trembling, until at last she found the origin deep within the Varun capital itself. The signal had been routed through abandoned towers, making it almost impossible to find. But she had followed every trace, every fragment, and now she knew. When she revealed the location, the room fell silent. It was not some distant rebel. It was not some lowly officer. It was members of the Varun, High Council themselves. Fear spread through the bunker. If their own leaders had turned to the Dominion, what chance did they have? Serin felt her stomach twist. The people had placed their hope in the Council, but now hope had been poisoned. The truth soon emerged. Several councillors had met in secret with Dominion agents. They believed the humans could not win. They believed resistance would only bring greater death. They argued that by surrendering quietly, by turning over the humans to the Dominion, Varun might survive. Though enslaved, at least they would live. The revelation broke the Varun people in two. Some shouted that the traitors must be executed. Others whispered that perhaps the traitors were right. Perhaps surrender was the only path. Serin felt the air grow colder as those whispers spread, because she knew how dangerous despair could be if the people chose silence again. Then all the sacrifice of humanity would mean nothing. When the humans learned of it, there was no rage, no threats. Admiral Kepler simply stood before the Varun leaders, his face carved from stone, and said calmly, "If you betray us, we will still fight. We will still bleed. We will still hold the line, because humanity does not fight for reward. We fight because it is right." Those words struck deeper than any weapon the Varun traitors had expected. Anger they had expected, desperation, but what they received was loyalty stronger than steel, and it shamed many of them. But the Dominion was already moving. The traitors had passed information, and Karzak intended to use it. The Dominion fleets returned, not in waves this time, but in precise strikes, surgical attacks targeting weak points that should have been hidden, fuel depots, shipyards, supply lines. The humans struggled to keep up, fighting back fiercely, but every blow landed where it hurt. Most Kepler realized quickly they could not win through strength alone, not while the Dominion had eyes inside their very heart. They needed unity. The Varun had to choose, either stand together or fall apart. Serin became the voice of that choice. She stood before her people, speaking not as a soldier, not as a leader, but as one of them. She reminded them of the day the galaxy had turned silent. She reminded them of the moment humanity had answered. She reminded them that even now the humans bled for a world not their own. She asked one simple question: will we betray those who refuse to betray us? The words echoed through the shelters and the streets. Whispers turned to shouts. Shame burned through the Varun, who had considered surrender. Humanity had stood when no one else would. How could they turn away now? When the Dominion returned for another strike, they expected chaos. They expected the Varun broken by fear. Instead, they found resistance. Varun fighters rose alongside human cruisers, their signals no longer hidden, their voices shouting into the comms: humanity, we stand with you. The battle was brutal, Dominion forces striking with precision. But for the first time, humans and Varun moved as one. Every ship covering the other, every soldier fighting not for themselves, but for the person beside them. The traitors were exposed one by one. Some fled into the night. Others were dragged before. Their people, their names cursed as symbols of cowardice. The Dominion lost their eyes, and the battlefield began to shift. Still, the Dominion pressed harder. Kazak, furious that his plan of betrayal had failed, unleashed weapons of terror, orbital bombardments that set entire regions aflame, seismic warheads that tore mountains apart. The Varun screamed as their lands burned, but even in the fire they did not kneel. They fought with humanity, their voices filled with the same defiance. Serin watched from her transmitter, tears streaming down her face as she heard the comms alive with unity, Varun pilots shouting with pride, humans answering with steady calm. Together, they wove a shield of steel and fire. The Dominion broke upon it again and again, but still it held. Kazak raged, his cruelty redoubled. He would show no mercy. He would burn Varun until nothing remained, but the sight that filled the galaxy was not of destruction, but of defiance. The traitors silenced the people, united humanity and Varun fighting as one, and in the hidden corners of the galaxy, in the shadows of worlds that had once been, silent whispers grew louder. If humans and Varun can stand against the Dominion, why not us? Why should we stay silent when they do not? The Dominion had tried to break them from within, but instead had forged something stronger than fear. The Varun no longer looked to the galaxy for rescue. They no longer begged for help. They stood beside humanity, and humanity beside them. Two peoples bound not by treaties or fear, but by choice. As the fires burned above and below, Serin whispered into her console, words that reached every corner of the fleet. We will not be silent, we will not surrender, we stand together. And the stars burned with the answer. Humanity stands with Varun, and Varun stands with humanity. The betrayal meant to end them had instead created something far more dangerous to the Dominion. Hope sharpened into defiance, and defiance carried by two voices together, loud enough for the entire galaxy to hear. The smoke of battle still clung to the skies above. Varun wreckage drifted. Across orbit, human and Varun ships side by side, their hulls scarred, but their resolve unbroken. The Dominion had failed to crush them with betrayal, but everyone knew the war was far from over. Admiral Kepler stood in the command deck, his eyes on the endless void. He had seen wars before, but never one like this. This was not only about weapons and fleets, it was about willpower. It was about proving that hope could not be strangled by fear. Serin sat at her console, her fingers moving quickly. Across controls, her ears filled with static and voices, she had become the voice of connection between Varun and human fleets. Her messages simple, clear and full of fire, and in those moments she could feel the power of unity. But she also felt the weight of shadows pressing closer because the Dominion was not gone. They were gathering, they were planning, and their next strike would be worse. The Varun people began to rebuild what they could, homes carved from stone, lit by fires, ships patched. Together with human technology, every moment filled with the knowledge that the Dominion could return at any time, and yet hope had begun to grow small and fragile, but alive. Mothers told their children about the humans who came when no one else would. Fathers stood guard with human soldiers as allies. Varun songs were sung again for the first time in years, but the music carried both pride and sorrow. Far away on a Dominion dreadnought, Karzak seethed in rage. The loss of Varun had wounded his pride worse than any blade. He paced his war chamber, his claws dragging across steel, his eyes burning with fury. He had underestimated humanity, and the weakness of Varun had turned to strength with their alliance. His voice thundered to his commanders: no more half measures, no more waiting. We will burn this world until it is nothing. We will make the humans regret they ever stepped beyond their cradle. The Dominion fleets began to gather more ships than before, war engines that dwarfed the sky carriers capable of unleashing storms of fire. Spies whispered of terrible new weapons, of enslaved worlds forced to build machines of destruction. Entire systems bent to the will of Karzak now turned their forges to the destruction of Varun. On Varun itself, tensions grew, though unity had been forged. The scars of betrayal lingered. The people whispered about those who had turned to the Dominion. They whispered about whether more traitors still hid in shadows. Admiral Kepler saw the danger clearly. Fear had not left it, only crouched, waiting for its chance to strike again. The humans began to train Varun soldiers more directly. Simple rifles were placed in trembling hands. Drills shouted across open fields. Young Varun learned to march beside human marines, to fight side by side in squads. At first they stumbled, their hands weak, their shots wide, but soon the spark of determination grew. Serin watched the training camps, her heart swelling with pride as she saw her people transform from victims into fighters. At night, when the stars glittered overhead, Serin often thought about the silence of the galaxy, the way no other race had come to help. Even now, as Varun burned, they remained hidden behind walls of fear, but she also felt something new, a strange sense that maybe Varun and humanity together could be the spark that forced the rest of the galaxy to wake. But before they could carry that spark forward, they had to survive. The Dominion did not wait long. Their attack came swift and merciless, fleets roaring from hyperspace, like predators striking at wounded prey. Alarms screamed across the human and Varun defenses. Every ship scrambled, every fighter launched into the sky. Explosions painted the night in burning red. The first wave struck hard, Dominion bombers diving through defenses, unleashing storms of plasma that tore through cities. Admiral Kepler barked orders, his fleet rising to meet them. Human cruisers locking into formations with Varun frigates together. They formed shields of firepower, lasers, crossing the void fighters, weaving between the giants of war. On the ground, Serin guided units from her console, her voice steady in the chaos. Varun squads moved into trenches. Human soldiers took positions at choke points. Artillery roared, shaking the mountains. The Dominion struck again and again, but this time the defenders did not break. Karzak's voice thundered across Dominion comms: press them harder, break their lines, show them the meaning of despair. His ships obeyed, unleashing weapons that made the skies bleed, meteors of fire falling like rain. Entire districts turned to ash. Varun screamed as the ground shook beneath their feet, but the defenders stood. Admiral Kepler led from the front, his flagship blazing through the heart of the enemy formation. Human marines boarded Dominion cruisers, fighting claw to claw in brutal corridors. Varun pilots dove their fighters into swarms of drones, their cries filled. With defiance, Serin shouted into her transmitter again and again. Her words, simple and sharp: "Hold the line, do not give them an inch." The battle stretched into hours, into a night. Without end, explosions lit the skies brighter than sun's shadows of war spreading across every horizon, blood and fire staining every field. But in that darkness, something unshakable began to shine through every scream, every shout, every order carried the same message: we will not fall. Even as the Dominion pressed harder, the defenders began to strike back human warships, pushing through gaps in enemy lines. Varun fighters diving at impossible angles, artillery raining fire onto advancing forces. The Dominion had expected fear, but what they met was fury. Still, Kazak would not relent. He unleashed his newest weapon, a ship the size of a small moon, a fortress of steel, bristling with cannons and engines that bled energy like storms. Its shadow blotted out the stars as it moved into orbit. Serin froze as the sensors lit up the size, the power. It was beyond anything they had faced. Before she whispered into the comm-admiral, "A behemoth has arrived." Kepler's face hardened as the massive warship opened its cannons, unleashing beams that cut through defenses like knives. Varun screamed as bunkers shattered, entire fleets scattering before the storm. For a moment hope flickered, the defenders staggering under the weight of power too vast to comprehend. But then a voice rose through the comms: "Serin." Her words breaking through fear. Humanity came when no one else would. "Varun stands with them now. Do not run, do not kneel. Stand, fight for every star, every breath, every child." The words lit a fire across the comms, human and Varun voices shouting back, their courage rising like a storm. Admiral Kepler clenched his fist and gave the order: focus fire, every cannon, every missile, every ship, target the behemoth. The skies lit with fury, waves of fire crashing against the massive ship, its shields blazing with energy. Still, it pressed forward, cannons tearing through lines, but the defenders did not stop. Wave after wave, they hurled their defiance at the beast, human ships sacrificing themselves to punch holes, Varun fighters flying in swarms to blind its weapons. Serin's hands shook as she directed the attacks, her voice hoarse but unyielding. "This is our world. This is our fight. We will not be silent again." At last, after endless hours, cracks began to form on the behemoth's hull. Explosions ripping through its massive frame. Human marines who had boarded from suicidal drops fought inside, tearing at its heart. The giant ship groaned under the weight of fire until finally, with a roar that shook the heavens, it exploded, the night turning into a sun, the shockwave rattling every bone, but also lifting every heart. Silence followed, broken only by ragged cheers. Humanity and Varun had done the impossible. They had slain the monster. But victory came with a price. Fleets reduced, cities burning, thousands gone. And still the Dominion fleets lingered on the edge, waiting, regrouping. Admiral Kepler knew this was only the beginning. Kazak would not forgive this humiliation. He would return with even greater fury. But in that moment, he also knew something else. Humanity and Varun had proven they could stand against the storm. They had proven that hope could survive fire. And in that victory, a signal spread across the stars. Other worlds heard it, whispers reaching across the galaxy, the silence beginning to crack. Perhaps humanity was dangerous. Perhaps humanity was reckless. But they were not silent, and neither now were the Varun. And so, as the smoke cleared, Serin whispered into the console, her voice raw but steady: "The Dominion is not finished, and neither are we. Humanity stands. Varun stands together. We will face whatever comes." And far beyond the void, Kazak listened, his rage burning hotter than suns. His vow sharp as a blade. "They think they have won, let them believe it soon. They will know what true despair feels like. Soon they will see their hope turn to ash." The war was not over. It was only climbing toward the fire yet to come. The ruins of Varun still smoked the air thick with ash and the metallic taste of blood. The survivors moved like shadows among the wreckage, their faces hardened by loss, but their eyes refusing to close against despair. Ships limped in orbit, their hulls scarred, and burning their engines, struggling to hold formation. But still, they hung in the sky like stubborn sentinels. Humanity and Varun had survived the storm. Yet they both knew the storm was far from over. Admiral Kepler stood in silence on the bridge of his flagship, his uniform torn, his face worn from endless hours of command, but his eyes sharp with unbroken resolve. He had seen great victories before, and each time he had known what came after retaliation. He leaned against the console, his fingers tapping slowly. The Dominion had tasted defeat, and Kazakh would never allow that wound to linger. Unanswered, Serin walked through the Varun capital, or what was left of it, stone towers reduced to rubble, fires smoldering between broken streets. Yet even here her people were rebuilding. Hammers clanged in rhythm. Children carried water, soldiers carried the wounded. There was no peace, but there was motion, a rhythm that whispered survival. She spoke softly to the workers, her words simple. You are alive. You are not forgotten. We stand together now. But fear clung to the air. Whispers carried through the crowds. Some said the Dominion would return with weapons that no fleet could stop. Others said more traitors were hidden among them, waiting to strike again. Some eyes turned on Serin, not with hope but suspicion. Had she led them into ruin by trusting the humans? Had humanity brought fire instead of salvation? The Council of Varun gathered what remained of their leaders, seated in cracked stone halls. The arguments loud and bitter. Some called for retreat, to scatter across the stars and survive as wanderers. Others demanded they kneel to the Dominion and beg for mercy. Admiral Kepler stood in the hall, his voice steady, but hard. Mercy from the Dominion is only slavery. If you bend, you will never rise again. He reminded them of what they had done together, of the monster they had slain, of the fire they had endured. Even as he spoke, a new message broke through the static of the comms. It was not from the Dominion, but from beyond the silence of the galaxy, a weak signal trembling as though afraid, but clear enough. A plea: we heard you. We thought no one could fight them. We thought resistance was impossible. Tell us how you did it. Tell us how you survived. The hall went silent, every voice frozen. The galaxy had been listening. The galaxy had seen what Varun and humanity had done. Hope had cracked the silence, and now it reached out, desperate and trembling. Serin's heart leapt. She whispered, "They are watching us, all of them." And Kepler's eyes narrowed with realization. This was more than a battle. This was a message. Every move they made now would echo across the stars. But Kazakh had not been idle on his dreadnought. He brooded, his claws scraping against steel, his eyes burning with fury. The behemoth had been destroyed. His fleets humiliated his enemies, standing proud instead of broken. He could not allow it. He summoned his war council, his voice thunder shaking. The chamber, unleash the scourge. No more fleets, no more hesitation. Burn their skies and poison their ground until nothing remains. The scourge was a weapon whispered in fear, an abomination forged in secret worlds. It was not an army. It was not ships. It was something worse. Swarms of machines, half living, half metal, designed to consume everything they touched. Planets turned to wastelands within days. Ships stripped of their hulls like carcasses. Bones picked clean. Kazakh would unleash them on Varun, and he would watch humanity burn, with them on Varun. Serin felt the tension rising, her people training with human marines. Their weapons clumsy, but growing steady. Drills echoed through the camps. Orders shouted across the fields, yet beneath the training there was fear, whispers of what was coming. A shadow darker than fleets, Admiral Kepler received the first fragmented intelligence Dominion ships, moving in strange patterns, carrying strange cargo scouts that never returned the first. Swarm arrived without warning, a black tide spilling from the void ships, crawling with insect-like machines that tore through armor as though it were cloth. The defenders fired every cannon, every missile explosions filled the skies, but for every machine destroyed more poured forward. The swarm moved not like soldiers but like hunger endless and cold. Siren's voice broke through the comms, steady but fierce hold. The lines burn them, do not let them touch the ground. Humanity and Varun fought. Shoulder-to-shoulder fire sweeping through the skies, ships ramming into the swarm in desperate sacrifice. But still they came still. The machines devoured. Kepler slammed his fist against the console. The swarm will not stop unless we strike at its heart. Find me the command ship. Find me the source. Varun's scouts dove into the chaos, their tiny fighters weaving through impossible odds. One after another fell their cries, swallowed by static, until at last one voice cut through. Admiral, we found it, a core ship larger than a city, pulsing with energy. Every machine flows from it. The order came at once. Every remaining ship, every remaining missile, every ounce of firepower aimed at the heart. The swarm pressed harder, sensing the danger waves, crashing against the defenses, tearing ships to pieces. Human marines screamed as corridors filled with metallic claws. Varun fighters dove until their wings burned, but they did not break. They hurled themselves at the monster. Siren shouted into her console louder than the chaos. This is our chance, this is our world. We will not bow to them. Do not stop until it falls. The battle raged like a storm of fire, hours, stretched like years, the swarm endless, the defenders unyielding, and then at last, the core ship cracked a single explosion. At first, then a chain of fire spreading across its surface until it erupted in a sun of destruction. The swarm screamed a sound, not of voices, but of dying machines as their bodies went still and fell like broken rain into the void. Silence followed silence, heavy with exhaustion and loss, but also with something new. The people of Varun lifted their eyes to the skies, and for the first time they did not only see stars, they saw possibility. They had survived again against something that should have consumed them. They had fought the swarm, and they had won. But Kazakh did not despair. His fury only grew sharper, watching the destruction of his scourge. He whispered into the silence, "Let them win. Their small battles, it will make their final fall all the sweeter. I will come myself, and when I do, there will be no survivors." And so the defenders stood bloodied and weary but unbroken, their signals spreading farther through the stars' worlds, listening, hearts stirring the silence of the galaxy, cracking wider every victory, calling others to rise. Humanity and Varun had stood against fire and survived, but the war was far from over. The darkest storm was still coming. The skies above Varun glowed, faintly with drifting wreckage, the last remains of the swarm still burning like fading embers in the void. The people stood among the ruins, weary, broken, yet still breathing and still alive. Children clutched their parents, soldiers leaned on broken weapons, engineers patched holes in shattered walls. Everyone moved as though the ground itself might collapse beneath them, but no one ran. No one surrendered. They had survived another storm. Admiral. Kepler stood at the command deck, his face shadowed. By exhaustion, his voice low when he finally spoke. "We won, but this is not the end." His officers nodded grimly. They all knew what was coming. Kazakh himself had sworn vengeance. The Dominion had lost fleets, lost weapons, lost pride. But they had not lost their emperor. Siren walked through the broken capital again. Her people bowed their heads to her, not out of despair, but respect. She did not see fear in their eyes. Now she saw something sharper, something stronger, determination. The Dominion had thrown monsters at them, and they had endured. She whispered to herself, the galaxy was silent before, But now they are listening. Now they will rise. The signal from Varun had not stopped spreading every day. New voices broke through the static, weak trembling, but real one by one. Worlds reached out, some small colonies begging for hope, some great civilizations long enslaved, asking if rebellion was possible. Even voices deep within the Dominion's shadow whispered their defiance. The silence of the stars was breaking. The message was simple. If humanity and Varun could fight then, so could they. But with every signal came danger. Karzak heard them too, his fury boiling with every new transmission. His claws tore through metal walls. His eyes burned with hatred. He had crushed hundreds of rebellions across centuries, but never one that spread like fire, never one carried, not by fleets, but by courage. He would not allow this defiance to spread. He would crush it himself. From the deepest reaches of the Dominion, his flagship rose, a fortress the size of a city. Its black hull absorbing light, its weapons enough to shatter worlds. It was not only a ship, it was a throne. Karzak's throne. He gathered his greatest warriors, his most loyal assassins, his deadliest machines, and he set a course for Varun on Varun. The defenders prepared humanity, and Varun side-by-side trenches. Dug weapons repaired, wounded soldiers refusing to rest. As they trained again, engineers rebuilt shields from scraps. Civilians carried supplies like warriors. Every man, woman and child had become part of the defense. Admiral Kepler knew this would not be just another battle. This would be the storm to end all storms. Serin stood with him on the cliffs overlooking the city, her voice calm but steady. "You brought us hope," she said. But he shook his head. "No, we gave each other hope. That is what terrifies him." When the sky darkened, it was not with clouds, but with fire. Karzak's dreadnought broke through the void, its shadow stretching across the planet, its cannons glowing with power. His voice roared across every channel, across every city of Varun. "I am Karzak. You are nothing. Your defiance ends today." The defenders answered not with fear, but with fire. Missiles launched, cannons thundered, fighters streaked across the skies. The battle erupted with a fury greater than any before. Karzak unleashed storms of plasma that ripped mountains in half. His soldiers descended like demons, tearing into the trenches. But humanity and Varun fought back with unbroken will. They fired until their weapons cracked. They fought until their armor shattered. They stood even when death closed around them. On the flagship, Kepler led the assault himself, his fleet diving against the dreadnought like knives against a beast. Serin led her warriors on the ground, their voices shouting in defiance, their banners rising above the smoke. And then came the moment. Kepler saw it through the chaos, the heart of the dreadnought, a glowing core deep inside, a weakness hidden but real. He spoke into the comms, his voice steady, even through the storm. "There it is, the heartstrike now." Every remaining ship, every fighter, every cannon turned their fire toward the core waves of Dominion ships, threw themselves in the way, desperate to shield their emperor. But the defenders cut through them. Fire burned, metal screamed. Varun pilots rammed their ships into the shields. Humans launched every last missile until the sky itself blazed. The core cracked. The dreadnought shook. Karzak roared in fury, his voice shaking the stars. "You cannot kill me. I am eternal. I am Dominion." But Kepler's voice answered him cold and sharp. "No, you are fear, and fear ends when we fight." The dreadnought erupted fire, tearing it apart piece by piece, until at last it broke, a storm of light ripping across the void. The Emperor's voice vanished, his throne gone. His shadow burned away. Silence followed, but it was not the silence of despair. It was the silence before a cheer, a silence heavy with realization. The defenders had won. They had faced the Dominion's might. They had faced Karzak himself, and they had survived on the ground. Serin looked to the skies, her eyes wet with tears. She whispered not to her people, not to herself, but to the stars. "Do you see us now? Do you hear us? We are not alone anymore." Across the galaxy, the message Spread louder than ever, worlds rose chains, broke rebellions sparked, the silence of the stars was gone, replaced by a fire that no empire could ever silence again. Humanity and Varun stood together, bloodied but unbroken, their alliance a beacon in the darkness, their defiance, a story that would echo through the ages, abandoned by the galaxy. Yes, but they had chosen to fight beside each other, and together they had changed everything forever.